Hey, we're back.
Hey, we're
We're
back.
back.
Welcome
We're
back.
we're we're, we're in we're not necessarily here mode situation. So
Yeah.
maybe you're we sort of lost a week over here because I got busy. I had to take care of like life stuff at home. How about you,
It's all
Mister
good.
Lawrence? Life stuff catch up
We,
to you, or
I'll tell
you?
you,
I see
I'll tell you,
you got a messy home over there. What's going
I've
on?
got a messy home. No, we sent my son to Texas. So he's in
Oh,
Texas for this month.
whoa! What did he
And
do wrong?
no, nothing
Just
wrong. Nothing
kidding.
wrong. He's just going to visit. But yeah, so I've been playing a lot of video games and, just hanging out. It's we
Oh
miss
my
him, but
gosh!
then again, it opens up.
Opens up some certain time, but
Yeah.
then usually, like I always thought that maybe that time would clear, and then of course, what did I do? I had another kid, so boom.
Yeah. Well, you put and we fill it up with things that aren't really that meaningful anyway, even if the time that I've got is not. I'm not doing anything um with computers or watching some new TV shows.
Hmm.
Ugly Betty.
Ugly Betty,
Going.
or you're catching up
Yeah.
with that finally?
Yeah, yeah, I haven't watched it. We're still in season 1. I think we're at episode 18 now. But yeah,
Aha,
that's it. And Girlfriends, another even older
even
TV show.
older, right?
Yeah,
Wow. So I've
so
been trying to like
digging
get
it.
the family over here in this side because they're, let's just say, like, well, like my wife's from another country, right? So she, and of course a lot younger and everything else, and then of course my latest daughter, who is like like 7. So
Hmm.
there's a whole bunch of, for me it's like a whole bunch of rediscovery for certain things. They're not there's so much, but there's, here's the thing, so much news coming out, new stuff,
Right.
and just keeping up with that is almost like sucking out all the air and time that's out there.
Well,
So
and yeah, we haven't finished watching the the new version of the new season, rather the half season of The Witcher
right, oh
dropped,
yes,
and we've not finished watching that. And Good Omens season
Good
2
Omens is
dropped.
actually out. I'm in the middle of that one. Witcher I
Yeah,
finished. I'm not going to tell you what happens, but
I've
they leave
watched
you hanging. That's for sure.
I watched the first one, and I've watched the first episode of the second season. Looking forward to more.
It looks
Yeah,
fun.
but you're exactly right. There's so much content out there. But understand that it we are going to see a drought coming because
Yeah.
of the Actors Guild.
So it might be that, it might be, how do we say it? It's almost like nature's way of like this would have happened anyway. It's like that, like what's that show out there? Foundations, like the Harry Sullivan way, saying, okay, you know what? It's going to happen anyway. The cycles are going to hit, and there's going to be that drought for you. Oh, you're in the religious phase now. Oh, you're in that phase. That's going to happen. So we're in the phase of content droughts, so people can catch up on the old stuff. You know what I've
Yes.
been listening to lately is like old timey radio.
Oh, nice.
So the other ones, like, it's like Sam Spade is walking down the hall just looking for, those guys, like
Yeah.
they have radioclassics.com is probably the
The
best place to go
Shadow.
look at that. The
Yeah.
Shadow, or like the Whistler, like when we started like doing all that stuff. The Whistler,
Hmm.
or like Life of Riley, or like when Lucille Ball was younger. By the way, Lucille Ball, thank you for Star Trek. You know, a lot of
Yes.
people are talking about that lately. But here's the thing. I'm listening to, essentially they almost sound like podcasts in a sense,
Right.
because I go and listen. I ask, for example, and make sure she's not here. I'll ask Alexa to, for example, play like a story, and they'll have the stories, and there'll be like people talking in them, and that's what they sound like. Those old radio shows. There are some
Right.
podcasts that are out there that are essentially like the old radio shows. They don't necessarily have
Yeah.
the commercials. You won't hear them trying to sell, Clorox or something like that. But still, there's the concept. Except, and then I'm trying to listen to this and thinking about all the ways people used to talk, and a lot of it, things that we're still using today. A lot of the sayings,
Right.
that like came from that generation, from that way of talking, that we're still using them. We're still using them in even in our daily banter and everything else. And of course, a whole bunch of stuff that nobody really uses anymore for good reason.
Yeah. But I'll tell you, Paul Rubens passed away recently, and
Yes,
we went back and watched the Pee Wee Herman, the original, Pee
to
Wee
go back to
Herman
see a good old Pee Wee.
movie.
Yes.
And watching it, there was so many things that you know absolutely jumped into the lexicon, right?
Oh,
I know
you
you're
got
up,
it.
what am I? And all of those.
Exactly. All these
That
these
movie was
phrases, and
just
it just that's just
cool.
Paul Rubens alone. That's
Yeah,
why you got to elevate him to that level, because just a lot of his lines alone were major pieces, and that's not just from that show. He was in other
right,
pieces as well. But yeah,
right.
oh man. I mean, that's the part that
Ah,
was getting to me, and my little girl's listening to it, so sometimes she like laugh, and it's like, well, here's like an old thing going on, and here's Lucy talking to like someone like Jack Benny in one of those really older shows from like the
yeah,
very early '50s, and so she was on a show on the radio that became the Lucy Show eventually. So she didn't have it was not her real life husband, who was already her husband at the time, who was part of that show, and he's listening to that, and she's laughing. It's like, oh, that's really silly. Oh, that's really funny, and all this stuff. And she's like, I'm just thinking, wow, across the generations, literally,
right.
here comes some of the stuff, and I'm thinking, is the AI watching that stuff too? Will the AI be able to
Well,
recreate that? And suddenly we have
see,
content. Oh no.
see, I think that's the thing. I think that the AI just imitates,
Yes.
and people innovate, and
Yes.
that's why
Do remember?
we need to always look at the AI as just a
Mhm.
co-pilot, right? As someone
Yes.
that's sitting there beside us, and not as a driver.
Not as a driver,
So
exactly. So
yeah,
it's a lot of these cases. These are the folks that drove back in the day. Now,
yes,
especially because when they
yes,
did it, it was innovative. Well, one of the shows, it was very interesting because, like, here we are. We'll retrospect, or sometimes we'll do a parody or something of one of those older things. And sometimes
hmm,
you'll see. I mean, a lot of the 8-bit stuff we see, like Minecraft and everything else. It's like, hold
right,
on a second. So people will, if someone from the past came and looked at that and it says, why did you do that? You have all the memory in the world. You have all the stuff. Why would you want to do what we did before? We did that because we had no memory. We didn't have that stuff.
right,
And it's like saying, we were starving. Why do you go walking around like you're starving? Or you don't have stuff. So going back
yeah,
to those days, there was one actual radio show where they were giving, like, it was, I think, a stage thing. They were giving a story of how film and movie started, and they were just very, and I'm not sure that it was a real dialogue. They were obviously making it dramatic for that radio of course, the 40s, or was it
right,
even the 30s, where like they were creating the film studios in California, where Beverly Hills had, I mean, Hollywood was literally incorporated only like a couple of years, and then somebody like had a farm and a barn. And then the folks from New York was like, "Hey, can we use your barn for office places?" Well, I guess so, if the cow doesn't mind, And they're like
yeah,
putting all that stuff together, and they're talking about the tech at the time, and then following through with that. And I'm starting to listen to that. I'm like, oh wow, this is like us when we talk about some of the older stuff, but that's
yeah.
them back then talking about even older pieces
Even
over
older
here.
tech. Well,
So
and
really cool.
it it's like the cycles of the moon, right? I mean, it always comes back. We keep seeing the same things over and over again, right? Think back to, when you and I were in college. Back in that time, a lot of the machines were shared machines, right?
Yes.
You did not have a personal computer as much as you had access to a mainframe,
Access
and
to
it
the
was,
to the machine, to the big guys.
to the
Yeah.
machine, yeah, to the big guys. You would get a small virtual machine that was your part of the machine,
Hmm.
and then we went away from that,
That's
and
right.
went to all in, small individual servers, but now we're coming back to it again. We went away from it again, VMware, and then we came back, and
You
it's
got it.
just, it cycles. We're going to cycle through all of these things.
Exactly. So I look, sometimes I'm going to look for those, not so much for ideas, but like for how people handle things and change going forward.
Right.
Right? It's like the concept is they handle the change. They always said, "Oh, we can't handle it." It's like all this stuff happened. So I remember sometimes, who was it? It was Al Jolson's show, on the Kraft Music Theater is what this one was. So here's
Hmm.
Al Jolson. He's already an old guy at this point. He's making all of the jokes about being old and everything else. And this is already like in, I guess, imagine the 40s and 50s. So he's like already way up there,
Right.
making jokes about, hey, I've seen everything. I've seen airplanes, I've seen telephones, I've seen radio, I've seen TV. And to him that was like whoosh, all that stuff. And now on our
Right.
side, we look back and we say, well, yeah, we already had all of those here, but we've seen more than that. For us, we've seen that we got the moon landing. That
Right.
would have been for us. But beyond that, it was really the whole the whole computer stuff that even the sci-fi shows of before, and we're like, I know Foundation is one where like that was written in the 40s and stuff like that. When they look now,
Yeah,
it's like they could not even imagine what we basically can envision now of what could happen. And then, of course, I'm thinking, wow, we can envision all this stuff. I can only imagine 10 years from now, we can envision something else and better.
absolutely. Well, and there are good writers out there right now like Cory Doctorow that are also pushing the boundaries, and they're pushing them
Yes.
into interesting places about
Yes.
privacy and about all of the things that we're sort of giving away, and the way that the computers within the United States, within the American society anyway, are really more. They have access to more information than anyone that doesn't work with it actually understands and knows.
There you go.
I mean, and that's been for 20 years. Just imagine what they're able to come up with now. I mean, 20 years ago, I was in Raleigh, North Carolina, and there's a company around there that I had a buddy that went to work with them and as a DBA, as a database
Yes.
administrator, and he was kind of laughing about every credit card you use, every purchase you've made, it's
Yes.
all in one big database. And what they can do with that information is they can track trends on your purchases, where and when and how and what you
Hmm.
buy, and they
Yes.
can tell a lot about
And
you
that's back
just from
then.
that. And
Yes.
that's back then. That's 20 years ago. And
Hmm.
imagine, every email you send, that's going through a server, and especially if I was I was early in the
It's
Google
sitting
emails, the
somewhere
Gmail.
accessible by somebody is the thing.
Exactly.
Oh dear.
So,
I mean, that's why the whole GDPR thing was to say we know it's out there, but we're going to do
yes,
our dangest. It's the genie out of the bottle situation. They can't really do they can't stop it dead, but they
no,
can do
but
is they say they can try to, I guess through the law try to encourage, let's say,
right.
better behavior by making it, let's just say, not worth it. I mean, that's the only way you can do it. It's like, if it's cheap to do something, if the fine is too little, I'll just keep doing it because that's my cost of doing business. But if it costs a lot and hurts me and it like takes away from me, oh no, I'm not going to do that.
But if you look back, you can see people, uh, the great thing about society, okay, the great thing is that it's adaptable and that we do change and we do move forward.
Indeed.
Back when the telephone came out, people were railing against the telephone and saying that it was going to destroy society because it was going to, people were going to stop writing letters, they were going to stop doing this and stop
Little did
doing
they
that and
know.
stop reading. And radio, the same kind of thing. People were
Hmm.
against it when it first came out, and
Yes.
and it did disrupt things. But we've come to, you know, a much better and a higher standard of living because of that.
Yes, it's true.
So AI is here. It's not going to go away.
Yeah.
It is
So
going to
that
disrupt things, but we'll reach a new normal
You got it.
in
My
probably
mom
in
is
5 years.
of that one. She's 89. She's like, oh, if it takes all the jobs away and everything else, I said, well, let's take a look at something over here. It's like you know that, and they were talking about the fact that maybe even the actors might be this stuff, and there's people losing their jobs and everything else. Well, that's true, but here's the thing: somebody's still making money with this. Who are they? What are they doing? What's their new model? It's the thing of the case of like, well, you can lament something, or you can go and see, well, then who's for every winner there's a loser somewhere and a loser winner.
Right,
Find out what the winning side is. If this guy lost, who beat them? They didn't beat
right.
themselves. Usually there's a winner somewhere and you find out what they're doing. Oh, it's not something I want to do. Okay, that's one thing. But if it's something that like, oh, I could easily do that.
Yeah. Well, Henry Ford, right, put all the buggy
Yes.
whip, manufacturers out of business.
Right.
It took a few years, but yeah, he put them all out of business, and
He,
we have automobiles now because of it. I mean, it's
that's right.
we as a society, when there is this disruption, there are going to be winners and there are going to be losers.
Yes.
Our society right now, though, uh, unfortunately, there are some barriers to entry to some of the
To be a
um,
winner, in some cases, you
to
have
be
to
a
like come
winner.
in heavy, or with either heavy tech, heavy knowledge, heavy money, whatever it is. And
Right.
it's
And
part
so
of the
we're seeing a
problem is the entry
concentration.
points. Right.
Right.
In the
We're
older
not
days, it
seeing
was
the
much
lower.
easier for a lot of those folks to get in because, well, the hurdles, let's just say, weren't so high, or the hurdles were like manageable. In this particular case, though, it's come to the point where like the have nots are really in a worse situation, I think, than they were before. But that being said, it's, as they say, things get democratized in other ways. For example, in like a lot of these countries that like the third world ones, if you remember, well, I don't even think third world is a really good way to call
I
those
don't.
countries anymore.
Yeah.
I frankly, here's the thing: it's like in their tech, in the case of some smaller places, the phone tech. For us, for example, I remember we're still paying like monthly charges for our phones, like massive amounts of money, right? And to get these special deals, no one, unless you're paying as you go and everything else, they all seem like, oh no, Chinsey, we can't use all that stuff. Meanwhile, all these countries are surviving on literally the pay as you go model, pennies on pennies, way less than we're going. It's like, well, hold on a second. They have tech that can seem to communicate better than us, faster than us, and they're more connected. And there's almost everybody's got a phone in those areas. Like, how could they do what we are doing over here? Well, you guys have your smartphones, you have all that data and everything else, and we're able to still accomplish the same thing, even though we
Right.
don't have what you have, because essentially they were able to say, I'll take this and make my version of it. The same way some of them were like, here's a like the jeepneys in the Philippines is a good example. The Americans left behind a lot of the old jeeps from surplus from the wars. They turned that around. They created their jitneys, which is essentially they just put their own stuff on it and rebuilt it. In like Cuba, for example, after everything left, they got used to like rebuilding what's out there. So you can see like classic
Right.
looking cars, but they're working again because they figured out how to take the tech and make it work. And once that happens, it's democratized, right? So
Right.
if the entry right now is high, at some point someone's going to say, well, all I need is just this, and I don't need you.
Well, because the way the market works is if I can sell it for a little bit less than you can, then I'll get your customers. And in order
Yes,
for me to sell it for less, I have to pay less for it, which means I have to come up with a smarter way of doing it.
right.
And that's the way, we just keep knocking it down until, you know, every pretty much everyone's got a smartphone or a smartphone, some type of smart device, unless
Some sort
they're,
of smart device. I mean, tiny
yeah,
and smaller and everything else. It's like not necessarily the big companies looking for a way to get around that. But actually, I think it's more of the demand on the smaller side that says, "Hey, you've maxed me out. Why should I want to buy an upgrade to this? This is the best. You
yes,
said this was the best thing, and I agree with you. 2 years later, and I agree with you. But that company says, yeah, but I need to make profits,
this
and
one's
I,
better.
I what do I do? It's like you've been a customer before. You liked my stuff before. Maybe I'm going to give this to you again. Why should I want that new stuff? This was just fine. So how do I
Well,
make what I told you was good not sound so good anymore?
part of that's our fault.
Yeah,
As
that's true.
software developers, we will always write software that will fill up all the memory and use all the CPU. That's
Yep.
just the way we do.
Yep.
Um, and it'll have a different type of interaction,
Hmm.
but it's gonna use everything that the device has. And so the
Yes.
new ones come up with new software. In order to run the new software, you have to have a new device. That's the way it works. I
That's
mean,
the and that's
does
yeah.
it
We're
is it
growing into
better?
it, as they say.
It's
Yep.
different. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, but then there's also I'll say I remember even like little things like the way graphics was handled. If you
Mhm.
recall, well, for the folks that are out there, because I know he does. I know. It's like we used to handle it on the CPU. Used to handle all the stuff. The RAM used to handle
Right.
all the stuff. Eventually, someone said, "You know what? What if we offloaded that thing onto its own place to get it done?" So the GPUs were created, the graphics processors. Like, yeah, well, because it's really the same thing as what you're happening over there, but because it's all happening in the same place, we're like, and because we're right now we want to be. we just don't have the technology yet to make that all happen in the same place. We're going to go over there, but now things are getting so much higher. If we take a CPU today and brought it back then, they probably would not have invented a GPU, because that was like, oh, but you
Yeah,
have it all
because
there. Why do I need a GPU when
why do I
you're
need a separate device?
exactly, this one thing does it all, and it's all in the same bus, and I don't need to mess around with nothing. Ready to go.
It
But
NVIDIA is killing us though. NVIDIA is, I mean, the newer GPUs are are crazy with the number of streams, the number of parallel um, actions that they can
yes,
take, and they are
wow.
just massively parallel. And so the CPU is not a parallel device. It's
Yes,
it has a certain number of threads, and we're getting more and more cores.
right.
But when you look at the CUDA cores, the cores on a GPU, you can get thousands of them, and it's
Yes.
crazy. It's crazy how
Yes.
much you can do with that
So
type, but you have to
NVIDIA is
change the
actually
way that you
behind a
think
lot
and
of the
change your
AI
mix.
stuff that's going on. A lot of the other pieces,
Hmm.
when you see that stuff, there's, and I think I mentioned there was the NVIDIA developer program stuff. I'm not sure if we
Yes,
shared that link before, but when I go through that, if I feel like really being in the cloud tech of stuff, I just look at that and play with those bits, and
right.
you really feel like you're up there, like you're,
Well, but I
whoa,
mean,
touching good
but
stuff.
behind all of the AI that we're most not all most of the AI that we're seeing and people are talking about now, beneath the underneath the covers, it's all math. It's
That's true.
linear algebra. It's the stuff that you hated in college, but
Hmm.
it's doing a lot of parallel calculations. That's just the way that works, and
It's
it's
able
great.
to do it at scale now. The thing is, the
Right.
scale and the ability to do it has come to the point where, like, here's what they're almost like saying when I hear about the large language models and everything else. The concept's like, I'm going to take the entire internet and stick it into a portable brain, and then
Yes.
do my own thing with it. And then I'm going to make hundreds and hundreds of copies of the whole internet into these little brains. Because when we talk into them, and I found out this was true in a sort of sense, when someone says we have this model and it's got 250 million things, the other one says, oh, I have trillions of things, and it's like, well, is that the whole internet? Well, not exactly, but it's the whole. When you do a search in the internet and you find this you're looking at this particular stuff, it's that
Right.
corpus that we're now able to almost like carry, not exactly carry along with us, but to put somewhere that you can use it in a more portable, and I'm going to say portable loosely, portable fashion. When I say loosely, as in I can now isolate it from the rest, and I don't need to go look to the outside to get what I'm missing necessarily.
But if you look at, so we're now back to though where gamers,
Yes.
there are gamers that stream their games from internet computers.
Yes.
And for example, the Xbox X that I've got
Yes.
downstairs, there are games that I just want to look at and play. I don't have to play them by downloading them and installing them on my machine. I can play them in
Right.
the cloud, and I
That's
can
right.
just stream them. And there are companies out there that have NVIDIA 46 or 4090s, no 4080s. I think
48.
that there is a shop that you can play your games, stream your games from an NVIDIA 4080, as many of them as you want. I mean, for a while they were stuck at the 3080s. I'll have to find a link for it, but I mean, why we're back to the way that we were when you and I were in college, where there's
Hmm.
just one big machine out there that everyone
Yes.
is connecting to, and we're all
Connecting to
sharing it.
exactly. So
Yeah,
that's
so
a full circle, and
full circle.
eventually we're going to be able to take this out. They're talking about ways to. I mean, it's the quantum stuff that's for me that I'm trying to get a handle on exactly how that stuff would work. It's like, well, other than the concept of the paradox, where like, well, it's almost like, does it mean I go to a computer and before I ask the problem, it says, here's your answer? It's like, wait a minute, I didn't even ask you. Yeah, I know what you're going to ask me. Sit down. They're going to do that to me. That'd be like, that would be very strange way to work. But we're closer to that only in the sense that we can now ask it, give me some ideas for stuff,
Well,
and
yeah,
it anticipates that by the fact that somebody had perhaps already asked, and it's just making it faster for you to find that information. That's all.
and it returns all of the answers instead of going through the answers one at a time.
One at a
It's
time,
that
exactly.
parallel parallelism
parallel
that we
thing,
were talking about
exactly.
before. And
That's all
it's
the fun
crazy.
stuff. That fun
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah, we don't. I wasn't going to go into another demo-y thing because I think we've been making folks a little
Demo heavy.
demo heavy over here. But I did want to say that going forward, we should try to make a time to do to see what Code Wars and maybe even the Copilot looks like. But I'm not sure. Do you have one of those accounts that you can use
I
to
do.
play with, or should
I
we set
do.
one up maybe?
I will do I'll do some Copilot for us next week. I'll have that
Ah,
set up for us.
okay.
I
So
will
that'll be our
gladly be the
homework.
demo dude.
Okay, great. Let's your turn to be the demo dude. Let's go look at
My turn to be the
go look
demo dude.
at code stuff next week. We're going back to our roots, going back to some code. Going back to
For
some
sure.
little code. We look at some code over there. That's until of course Raquel makes available her team to talk to us at one point to be our guest. But that's still up
That's
there.
right.
Don't worry about it. It
If
will
we can
happen
get them
soon
in
enough.
next week, then we'll have them next week. Otherwise, it will be, yeah, maybe maybe we'll get people to call her to, so they don't have to watch me code, because you know how
Yeah,
that goes.
and indeed,
That's never
well,
fun.
we'll see. That might be interesting.
All right.
I might be just as a thought.
All right.
It's like to get someone who wants to have some internet exposure, perhaps to come in and work with us. We'll see. We'll see. But
All right.
anyways, yes, that's our goal. We try to get there, and we can say bye-bye for this short show for
Yeah.
now.
Thanks,
And
everyone.
we'll
Have a
catch
great
you
summer.
next time.
What's left?
See ya.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning into this Cloud Talk Show premiere. This has been another of many episodes of our show. Remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe so you can stay tuned for all the latest cloud tech news with Ralph and Larry. We'll see you next time.